Welcome to our study on covenant law. And tonight we're going to start something new, which is looking for the answer to a key question. And if you have the answer to the key question and you can send an email to me with the answer to it, we'll have a premium available. In this case, we'll tell you what it is at the end of the broadcast. But there'll be, and like you say, if you have the answer to this, you can then send it an email to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com, and I will send you a chart. We'll describe what it's going to be at the end of the broadcast. All right. And tonight's key question is, so you had it ahead of time, you can be looking for it. What is the purpose and function of the law within the covenant? Because there's covenant and there's law, and that's, of course, is tonight's topic, covenant law. So what is the purpose and what is the function of the law within the covenant? Turns out, I'll tell you right now, they're the same. But what is that purpose and function? It is the purpose and it functions in the same way. When we're talking about the covenant, let's move forward then. We want to begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity we have to study together. We ask your blessing as we move forward. May your Spirit instruct us. And may our hearts be open, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, therefore, know therefore that the Lord is your God. Your God is God. That is, the Lord would be Yahweh. The Lord your God is God. There's only one. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. Now, of course, the 1,000 generations is not a limitation here. It's simply an expression of saying forever. God is faithful, and it doesn't matter how many generations there are. God will keep his covenant. And that's important to understand. The election of Israel. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. Now, this is something we mentioned last week, but let's go into it and look at it in some detail. Remember that Abraham was called from the Ur of the Chaldees. The Ur of the Chaldees is near Babylon. It's in the Fertile Crescent. It's between the Tigris and Euphrates. And their great empires had arisen even before the one we know as Babylon, the Sumerian Empire, the Akkadian Empire. And it would have been in the Akkadian Empire would have been the one that Abraham was called from. And he was in Ur. Now let's take a look at that and see what that means, the difference, because he says there were not a lot of you people. They weren't the most numerous people. You were the fewest of all people. Let's look at what that might mean. Well, here is the map. Well, the seas turned out blue and looked like, so they're transparent. But anyway, the Akkadian Empire, as you can see, is all along where ancient Babylon was today. Most of Iraq is there, along the Tigris and the Euphrates, the great rivers, and it stretched as far almost to the Mediterranean Sea. It stretched a very long ways indeed. And this was the Akkadian Empire. And Ur would have been down here in the middle of the most populous area down there. You see among Nippur and Lanka and so forth. In fact, Ur is right down there, almost to what we call the Arabian Gulf. It's the bottom name in that cluster of names there, Ur. So he was right in the thick of the ancient empire of Akkad. This would have been the home territory. And what kind of, when we say the most numerous of all peoples, well, here is, I'm sorry about this, I'll get out of the way and it won't be distracting. That picture above is a picture of the temple of Akkad at Ur. This is actually at Ur, the place where Abraham came from. And it's difficult to see, but up in the far left corner, there's a tiny little figure standing. It's the figure of a human being. So this was a massive temple. This still exists. These ruins exist. You can see the piles of rubble at the top. And the piles of rubble at the top, of course, indicate that there was building on above this. But this is the ziggurat. This is the tower at Ur. And so it is very possible, it dates from the time of Abraham. It's very possible that Abraham actually saw this temple. And who knows how close he came, whether he walked on it or not. Probably not. He probably wasn't a priest of the Akkadian Empire. But the point is simply that this is a temple. This is the kind of building. And to produce this kind of building would take thousands of worshipers, whether they were the taxes of thousands of worshipers, or whether it was simply the labor. It would take thousands of worshipers of Akkad. And by contrast, if you look below the inset, there's a picture of Abraham and his altar. And so what you see here is that you have a magnificent, gigantic temple produced by thousands of worshipers compared to one man worshiping God at his altar. That's the contrast. You were not a great people. They were nobody. As I said in my book, Torn Jacob's Story, there were 3 goat herders, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We hear these great, resounding tones. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There were 3 goat herders. And although they had numerous servants and so forth, there might have been a couple of hundred people, a few hundred people, but there were thousands upon thousands of worshipers in Sumer and Akkad. And of course, in Egypt as well. So that is when he talks about you were not the most numerous of people. No, they were tiny compared. They almost didn't exist. Certainly didn't exist in the eyes of the great worshipers and the great religions of the world. 3 families. But they were elected. Now, elected, of course, doesn't mean that there was a vote taken. Elected means they were chosen, the selection, if you will. God selected. He elected Israel to be his spokespeople. He elected Abraham because Abraham had faith. That's exactly what it says in Genesis 12. And here we are in Deuteronomy 4:13. And in Deuteronomy 4:13, what's taking place is that Moses is reminding the children of Israel, now millions strong, of how they got where they are. They're about to enter the promised land, and he's trying to prepare them to live covenant life in the world in which they existed. It's very much the same challenge we have today of living kingdom life in a world which is far from the kingdom. And so that's the challenge. He's reminding, he's preparing them, he's setting them up so that they can live the kind of life that will be conducive to the blessings of God. And we'll look at that as we go. And he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. So his covenant, the 10 commandments and his covenant are essentially the same thing. Remembering, crucially, remembering that the 10 commandments don't begin with, thou shalt have no other gods before me, but they begin with, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, in verse 1. So the covenant is the 10 commandments. Here's what I've done for you, and here's what you need to do for me. Now, when I say for me, we're getting to the point of what is the purpose of the law within the covenant? And we'll get to that directly here. The purpose and the function is this way. Now, the word that is translated law from Hebrew is Torah. There it is in the Hebrew and the English. Remember that Torah, that Hebrew is reads from right to left and not left to right. So those are mirror images, if you will. Torah. And the word Torah can mean instruction, it can mean teaching, it can mean law, it can even mean the way. This is the way that you should go. It is how to live. Again, how to live covenant life among the pagans and idolaters. The same as our challenge today. How do we live kingdom life among atheists and agnostics and those who worship many other gods? And so that's how that works. The law within the covenant. This is the instruction, the teaching, the law, the way. Here's how do you stay. I have brought you out of Egypt. I brought you out of bondage. I'm bringing you to the land of promise where you will have rest. Now, the rest doesn't mean lying back in a hammock. Rest means that they will be able to productively pursue the commission God gave Adam and Eve. They will be able to till the soil, and they will be able to be fruitful and multiply. That's what the shalom, rest in the land, is. And so he's promising them that, and here's how you get to do that. And now Israel. This is Deuteronomy 10. It's interesting. Deuteronomy 10. Listen to it carefully. And now Israel, what does the Lord God, your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I'm giving you today for your own good. Notice there's a question mark at the end. This is a rhetorical question, meaning that the answer is inherent in the question. What does the Lord ask of you? To fear him, to walk in obedience with him, to love him, to serve him with all your heart and all your soul, and to observe his commands and decrees. In fact, you could say that these are equivalent. To serve the Lord your God, to love him, to walk in obedience to him, and to observe the commands and decrees are the same thing. And this gets us to the answer to the key question. What is the function of law within covenant? He's described it here in some detail. And you may recognize this because this is echoed centuries later by another prophet. What does the Lord require? Deuteronomy, it is addressed to Israel. In Amos, it is addressed, oh man. I'm sorry, it should be Micah, by the way. I made a mistake there. Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? What does the Lord require of you? Notice the parallels there. But to fear the Lord your God, to act justly. To act justly, to be just toward people, is part of the fear of the Lord. Because God is just, we should be just as well. Because God is just, if we are unjust, we shall be judged by God as unjust. And so that's the fear of the Lord is to act justly, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, and to love mercy. Because remember that when Moses on the Mount of Sinai says to God, I want to see you. And God says, nobody can see me. It would be your death if you saw me. But if you'll hide in the cleft of the rock, I'll cover you with my hand, and I'll just parade the backside, meaning I won't hit you with the full glory, just a hint of it. But what is the glory of God? That he declares his character. He is long-suffering. He is kind. He is merciful. So to love God is to love his merciful nature, to love mercy itself. God is love. God is mercy. So to fear the Lord is to act justly, because he will act justly toward us in a good and bad sense. That is to say, if we are willful and do not repent, we will suffer. To love him, to love mercy, to serve the Lord with all your heart and all your soul, and to walk humbly with your God. It's the same ideas distilled a little bit further as we get to the later prophets. This is the same basic message being given here. Our lessons this quarter are very rather succinct. They tend to be rather compressed, so this one won't take as long as some do. The stability of God's law. Oh, yes, I want to go back. I need to go back a couple slides here and get this, because this is important. I discovered this actually when I was working with the legislature. Laws exist to safeguard relationships. This is the answer to the key question. What is the function and purpose of the law within the covenant? It is to safeguard the relationship between God and his people. It is safe to safeguard the relationship between God and you. Because if we violate relationships, we say that salvation is a saving relationship. But as we certainly know on this earth, relationships are hard to maintain and they're easy to violate. I mean, divorce is, it's epidemic. Broken homes and broken hearts and broken relationships are all around us. And the purpose of the laws, whether it's all laws, you go to drive to the grocery store, you don't expect someone to pull out a pistol and shoot you. You don't expect the person driving the other lane to suddenly pull over in your lane and ram you. We have laws in order to safeguard relationships, to make a safe and peaceful and prosperous society possible. And the same thing is true of relationships, to have a safe and prosperous and peaceful relationship with our spouses, within our communities, and so forth. And so we have laws against murder. That doesn't mean that it is not in the nature of humanity that we can be perfectly just and we can prevent all murders, but we can punish murders in such a signal fashion that it deters some who would murder. Not everyone. That's, again, in an imperfect world, it's not something we can do. We have laws against theft and fraud, and con schemes and things like that, because these break down the relationship. If go to a auto dealership and buy something which is a bad deal and it is misrepresented, I have a cause in law because that person knowingly deceived me. Now, and that's what makes it possible for us to have an auto industry and all of that, is that most of the time, yes, there are problems, but we don't have to worry for the most part about being lied to by the dealer. There are laws to prevent that. There are ways of taking action to punish that. And that is to safeguard the relationship so that exchanges can take place, so that we can buy things with at least some confidence. We have lots of laws for those purposes. We have laws against physical abuse. We have laws against vandalism. We have many kinds of laws, and these are all designed to allow a relationship, peaceful and prosperous and productive society, to move forward. If you live, and people do, unfortunately, live in societies where the only protection they have is to buy their own weapons, and they have to spend half of their time defending their homes and their families instead of producing something, you end up with a subsistence society, a very oppressive and also a very poor society, poor in material terms, also poor health, and all of these things, because the relationships have broken down and people cannot trust one another, and they must always be looking out to protect themselves against these unwanted assaults of various types. And that's what the purpose of the law within the covenant is. God says, I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I brought you out of the house of bondage. I'm giving you rest in the land. I'm allowing you the opportunity to fulfill the commission, because when you fulfill your commission, when any of us does what God has created us to do, that is when we feel fulfillment and peace and worth and a whole list of things. That's a productive society. He doesn't give everybody the same gifts. And that's also a value, because I'm a terrible mechanic. I need someone to fix my car. I'm good at some other things. So I make my contribution, and other people make their contributions. These are good things. And the laws, all of the laws, are designed for the purpose. Now, they should be, let's put it that way, but certainly the laws within God's covenant are And I can tell you that having worked with legislators and politicians, yes, I know what people think of politicians, but I have met a number of people with great integrity and great goodwill who were in politics. And there's one state senator who was politically on a different camp than I, but we worked together to pass a law. And later on, when he met my wife, he said, "Your husband and I worked together to make a better Iowa. That's our state." Well, that's what people who really are concerned about making laws and want to do things. That's what they really want to do. They want to make their state, their city, their community, their nation a better place, not better than somebody else, a better place for those who live there. And that's the purpose of law, period, again, is to safeguard relationships. And so when God says, "You'll have no other gods before me," well, he's the one who led them out of Israel. Out of Egypt. He led them out of slavery. And why would they give someone else the credit? Why would they give someone else their worship when he is the one that was their savior, literally? He delivered them, literally. He says, "You won't make any graven images of me," because you can't manipulate me. They have to understand that he's not like the other gods. And we're going to see that in one of the texts here. We saw it briefly. He doesn't change. You can't change him. You can't run him around. You can't manipulate God. And that is unlike the other gods who can be bought off. And if you get their little images, their mascots, their totems, and you can carry it in your pocket, and you can invoke their name and cast a spell, conjure on someone else, for good or for ill. And the God of Israel says, "I'm not like that. And if you try to do that with me, it's going to break down our relationship. It's not going to work." And the same with the third commandment is to conjure, to cast spells with his name. That's taking his name in vain. There are other ways as well. But that's really the main thrust of the third commandment. The fourth commandment, of course, is learning to have rest, and to do that, to contemplate God himself. And you could go right on through there. There's, the fifth commandment is to honor your parents. Societies where parents are honored tend to last, even when that honor is overemphasized. In Asian societies that have ancestor worship, yet they are very stable. They've been very stable societies from many, many, many generations. And when families break down, societies break down. We see this, it's happening all around us in the Western world right now. That is the primary problem that we have. I know people like that's not a popular thing to say, but it is a true thing to say. And that's all that matters to me. So that's the first. So that's the fifth commandment. The sixth commandment: don't kill. We've talked about that. We talked about it in Genesis 4. And in Genesis 4, you have this man who is perfectly willing to kill people just for offending him. And what you see then is in Genesis 6 that the earth is full of violence. The earth is so full of violence that God has to cleanse it to get rid of sinners. So that's the next part. The seventh one is adultery. And the same thing goes to murder is to kill a person. To commit adultery is to kill a marriage. And I'm not saying that forgiveness isn't possible. People can't patch it up. But it's very, very difficult. And adultery does kill a lot of marriages. And again, if you kill families, because marriages, and the literature on the children of divorce 20 and 30 years later is devastating. Children are the ones who suffer, and so society suffers for at least a full generation. And very commonly, I see it again and again where the children of divorce themselves divorce because their role models did this. I see a lot of young men whose fathers ran away, and they're so angry at their fathers, and they don't realize they're repeating their mistakes. And they do the same thing. And fatherlessness is a huge problem. The same thing happens the other way. Women whose mothers divorced tend to get divorced. And so divorce is this terrible plague that strikes society and the breakdown of families. Having said that, now no one should take this as an absolute, divorce is always the wrong thing to do. As I've said many times, divorce is sometimes necessary, but it's always a tragedy. And we need to recognize that. But that's why we have the seventh commandment: no adultery. Don't attack families any more than you attack individuals in the sixth commandment. And the eighth commandment is don't attack property. Now, this isn't popular today. Marxism and socialism have become the popular doctrines of the day, and the common ownership of everything. But that's not a biblical concept, and I can't go into that at length here, but it's often believed to be so, but it's quite false. And that's what the thou shalt not steal. Don't take things that don't belong to you, because again, when taking becomes profitable and producing new things is no point, because someone will take it from you. People stop producing, and society, everybody grows poorer. That's why you have laws against theft, and that's why the eighth commandment is there. The ninth commandment is if you don't have a justice system that works, and I'm not going to say that because right now the justice system in the United States is under severe criticism, much of it unfair, but not all of it. No human justice system will ever be perfect. That's just not available. I wish it were, but it is not. But it isn't even possible to approximate if people are free to perjure. Justice depends upon, even in the Bible, the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, Deuteronomy tells us. But those witnesses must be telling the truth. And that is what the ninth commandment is primarily about. It's primarily about giving a testimony in a court. It's not about lying in general, although lying is not usually a good thing. It's a bad policy. The point is simply that these are rules, these are principles which apply to all situations. And they're rules that make a society better. Now, the 10th commandment is unlike any of the others because it deals with things that cannot be seen. The results sometimes are evident. I might covet someone's wife and eventually end up committing adultery with her. I might covet someone's property and end up stealing it. But it's not something that I might covet something from my whole life and never act upon it, but it's still distorting my life. And that's what makes it that makes the Ten Commandments such a different law, because they understand that God understands. And the Ten Commandments, by this inclusion of coveting, Ten Commandments understands that coveting is the root of all the other evils. I know it says the love of money is the root of evil, but when you talk about the love of money, you're talking about coveting money. You're coveting these things. It is at the tree of knowledge and good and evil, the woman is told that she can become like God. She is so eager to become like God that she eats the fruit, which she's already been warned will kill her. And it does kill her. She begins to die at that moment. But it's coveting that is the root of all the other sins. And so that makes the Ten Commandment law unique. But you can see that the laws exist, again, to safeguard relationships. If I covet my neighbor's house or my neighbor's wife or his livestock or whatever, that is going to break down my jealousy, my envy. Is going to break down our relationship. Is going to degrade it. So all laws exist. Good laws, just laws, exist for the purpose of safeguarding relationships. Now, human laws can go too far, and human laws can have other purposes. But God's law in the covenant has this purpose, and it has this function. That is to say, the purpose is to safeguard the relationship between God and his people. And the function is that if we obey the law in the way that it is meant, he showed the good man what is good. If we obey the law in the sense that we understand it's safeguarding the relationship, then it does exactly that. And this is evident, for example, in the situation with Joseph when he's tempted by Potiphar's wife. What he says is not, how can I do this and betray my master, although that would do it, and it would cause and again, it would break down relationships. But what he says is, how can I do this thing and sin against God? He recognizes that all sin at the end, as C.S. Lewis says, all sin is sacrilege, because we take the divine power in God we live and move and have our being. We take the power that God gives us and we use it against him. So that is, in fact, a sacrilege, and it's something that it's blasphemous in a sense. So these things are it's fascinating how they work out. So, but that's the whole point, that Joseph understands that, yes, it will damage his relationship with Potiphar, but even more so, it will damage his relationship with God. And that's the purpose and the function of the law within the covenant, is to safeguard the relationship between the one who delivers them and those whom he delivered. It is to allow them to continue to live in shalom, in peace, in rest, Shabbat, in rest in the land. It doesn't mean they would do nothing or they'll be lying around eating bonbons, as some people say. It means that what they will do is they will be able to pursue their God-given commission, their God-given purpose. And that's what the law within the covenant does. It helps us, it allows us, it produces a society which is conducive to each of its members developing their gifts and contributing their gifts to the whole. That's the way it works. So that's the answer to our key question, and so to safeguard relationships, and we'll get there in a minute. Now, again, we showed you this already, that the parallel between these two is really something. The stability of God's law. I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. That's an interesting take. But the whole point is here that if God changed and he suddenly were to, as David says, if God were to count our sins, we'd all be destroyed. If God were to stop being gracious and start being judgmental, we're done. If it is true, as Paul says, and I believe it is, in him we live and move and have our being, then if God wills it and he changes and says, well, I'm not putting up with your behavior anymore, my next breath doesn't come. I'm done. It's over. And so that's the import here of I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. It is because of God's unchanging nature. And we talked earlier about the earlier text said he was faithful. He will not destroy the world again through a flood of water. God is faithful. Every time after that his throne is depicted, we see the rainbow. I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. It is because of God's unchanging nature that we continue to exist. And that's, that's fairly important to us. James 1:17 is a parallel passage in the New Testament. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. As it said, there is no shadow of turning. This is pretty amazing. God is constant. God is consistent. God can be trusted. Because that is the ultimate question. We've talked about it many times, and we're going to talk about it again, because that is the central issue of salvation history. Central issue of salvation history is simply we threw away trust in the Garden of Eden. We trusted the serpent rather than God. And trusting God today, I know, is difficult for me to do. To trust Him in everyday things. I'm a very weak Christian in some ways, and I have to recognize that. And what God is saying here is, I don't change. You can count on me. You can count on me. And that's a big challenge for me, as I said, and a big part of the Christian life today is learning to count on God, to live. That's living kingdom life in this world where people don't count on anything. Or they count on their 401k. They think they're going to have enough money to retire, or their, whatever it is, their IRA or their investments or whatever they count on. These things could be gone in an instant. They may well be gone in an instant. That happens. But God can be depended on. The only security, there is no security in this world. The only security in this world is to trust in God. Well, that's the lesson for tonight. As I say, these lessons tend to be fairly succinct and very brief. And so I want to just close this off by saying, remember tonight's key question: what is the purpose and function of the law within the covenant? I've given you the answer, spent some time on it. And if you send the answer by May the 23rd to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com, I'll send you a chart describing what does it mean to have a saving relationship with God. It's a very succinct summary, and it helps us understand and begin to realize when we talk about salvation as a relational issue, what does that mean? This gives us a method of understanding it, gives us a vocabulary and a way to determine how our relationships are with other people and with God as well. So it's, as I say, it's free. Just send the answer to tonight's key question: what is the purpose and function of the law within the covenant? By May 23 to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com, and I will send you back a chart that you can print. All right. Well, I want to thank you for showing up. I'm sorry for this brief tonight, but it's the lessons are what they are, and this is an important one to understand. That we tend to confuse the law and the covenant in a way that says the law is the key to understanding the covenant. It's the way to maintain the covenant. Not in itself, it isn't. Remember what the New Testament says, that anything that is not of faith is sin. So if we keep all the commandments out of fear, then we will have a somewhat improved situation in life, but it will not be a saving relationship, because anything that is not of faith is sin. And so what happens is misrepresenting, misunderstanding God's nature. That's the problem of keeping the law out of fear. But when we keep the law to safeguard the relationship, we find that it does more than that. But again, thank you, and I'm going to enjoy being with my grandchildren later today. This should come up the regular time. There will be an edited version. The coughs and various other things come out live as live, and you can't change that. But anyway, that will be. This should be on my page at 7 tonight, unless some other technical thing happens. And it will show up in an edited form very soon anyway. Thank you for being here. Let me know. Again, you can always send to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com questions or comments. And you can find out other materials which are available by going to my Patreon page, patreon.com/ Bible journeys. Well, thank you, and good evening. And Lord willing, and I'll be live next week. I'll be alive, but also be a live broadcast. And we can embark once again together on a Bible journey. Until then.